Rebecca Martinez had always been small for her age, but what she lacked in size, she made up for in determination. At 23, she stood barely 5 feet tall, with calloused hands and grease permanently embedded under her fingernails. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had owned Martinez Aviation Services for 35 years, building it from a single-engine repair shop into one of the most respected aircraft maintenance facilities on the West Coast. Rebecca had grown up in those hangars, learning to read engine diagnostics before she could properly read books. The business had been her playground, her classroom, and eventually her inheritance. Miguel had suffered a massive heart attack 6 months ago, leaving Rebecca to run the company alone. She'd been doing well, maintaining their reputation for excellence, but the military contracts were where the real money lived. Those contracts kept the lights on and the payroll met. Martinez Aviation Services had been maintaining aircraft for Edwards Air Force Base for over a decade. They specialized in the older aircraft, the ones that needed experienced hands and intuitive understanding rather than computer diagnostics. Rebecca knew every rivet, every wire, every potential failure point on those birds. She could diagnose problems that stumped pilots with 20 years of experience. The trouble started when Colonel James Harrison arrived at Edwards. Harrison was career military, a man who believed in order, hierarchy, and the chain of command above all else. He'd been brought in to modernize operations and cut costs, which in military speak usually meant eliminating civilian contractors and bringing everything in-house. Rebecca had heard the rumors but hadn't taken them seriously. Martinez Aviation Services had an impeccable safety record and competitive pricing. Their work spoke for itself. The first sign of trouble came during a routine maintenance inspection. Rebecca was working on an F-16 that had been experiencing intermittent electrical issues. The problem was subtle, the kind that only showed up under specific conditions. She'd traced it through 3 different systems before finding the culprit: a wire harness that had been installed incorrectly during the last depot-level maintenance. It was a $2,000 fix that could have prevented a $30 million aircraft loss. Instead of praise for catching the problem, Rebecca found herself facing questions about her qualifications. Major Patricia Williams, Harrison's deputy, had arrived with a clipboard and an attitude. Williams was everything Rebecca wasn't: tall, imposing, with perfect posture and a voice that carried authority. She questioned every repair, every procedure, every decision Rebecca made. "Miss Martinez," Williams had said, emphasizing the civilian title, "I'm not seeing the proper documentation for this repair sequence. Our technical orders specify a different approach." Rebecca had pulled out her tablet, showing the maintenance manual section that supported her method. "Ma'am, with respect, the 2 you're referencing is for the C model. This is a D model, with different wiring specifications. The repair I'm performing follows the correct procedure. William's face had flushed slightly. I don't appreciate civilians questioning military procedures. We'll be reviewing your contract status. That conversation had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, Rebecca had felt the walls closing in. Inspections became more frequent and more hostile. Paperwork requirements multiplied overnight. Deadlines that had been reasonable became impossible. It was clear that Harrison and Williams were building a case to terminate the contract. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning when Rebecca arrived at the base to find her access badge had been deactivated. The security guard, Sergeant Thompson, looked genuinely apologetic as he explained that civilian contractor access was being reviewed for security purposes. Rebecca's crew was locked out, unable to complete work on 3 aircraft that were scheduled for flight operations the next day. Rebecca Martinez sat in her truck outside the base gates, watching planes take off and land, knowing that somewhere in those hangars were aircraft that needed her expertise. She'd built her entire life around keeping those birds in the air, and now politics was grounding her. But Rebecca had learned more than just aircraft maintenance from her father. She'd learned patience, persistence, and the importance of playing the long game. The old man had always said that in aviation, shortcuts kill people, but thorough preparation saves lives. Rebecca was about to put that philosophy to the test in a way she'd never imagined. She pulled out her phone and began making calls, starting with the most important one. Her father's old friend who now worked at the Federal Aviation Administration. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been Miguel's contemporary in the aviation world, one of the few women who'd broken through the glass ceiling in the 1980s. She'd moved from maintenance to engineering to oversight, eventually becoming one of the FAA's most respected inspectors. When Rebecca explained the situation, Alina's voice turned cold. "They're playing politics with safety," Alina said. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that causes accidents. Let me make some calls." Rebecca's next call was to Marcus Johnson, her father's lawyer. Marcus had handled the original military contracts and knew every clause, every protection, every requirement. When Rebecca described the recent events, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "They're trying to force a breach," he finally said. "Create conditions that make it impossible for you to fulfill the contract, then claim you're in default. It's not legal, but it's difficult to fight unless you have documentation." "I have documentation," Rebecca said. "Dad taught me to keep records of everything." Over the next several days, Rebecca worked from her office, but she wasn't idle. She compiled maintenance records, photographed completed repairs, and documented every interaction with base personnel. She also began researching Colonel Harrison and Major Williams, learning their backgrounds and previous assignments. What she found was illuminating. Harrison had been brought in specifically to reduce civilian contractor usage. His previous assignment had resulted in a 40% reduction in contract costs, though Rebecca noted that 2 safety incidents had occurred within 6 months of the changeover. Williams had been Harrison's deputy at that base as well, and her personnel file showed a pattern of conflicts with civilian contractors. But Rebecca's most important discovery came from an unexpected source. While reviewing maintenance logs, she noticed something odd about the F-16 she'd been working on when the trouble started. The aircraft had a history of electrical issues that went back years, but the problems had been getting worse recently. More importantly, the aircraft was scheduled for a major exercise next month, one that would put it through extensive combat maneuvers. Rebecca knew that aircraft intimately. She'd worked on it dozens of times, knew its quirks and weaknesses. The electrical issue she'd identified wasn't just a minor problem. It was a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. Under the stress of combat maneuvering, that faulty wire harness could fail completely, causing a cascade of system failures that could kill the pilot. She documented her findings in detail, including photographs of the problematic components and a technical analysis of the potential failure modes. Then she sealed the report and sent copies to 3 different recipients: the FAA, the Air Force Inspector General, and the Congressional Subcommittee on Military Oversight. The response was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, Elena Vasquez was on a plane to Edwards Air Force Base, accompanied by a team of federal investigators. The Inspector General's office opened a formal inquiry into maintenance procedures and contractor relations. The Congressional Subcommittee requested a full briefing on the situation. Rebecca's access badge was quietly reactivated, and she was asked to provide technical assistance to the investigation. She found herself back in the hangars, but this time she wasn't alone. Federal investigators watched as she demonstrated the electrical problem, documented the repair procedures, and explained the potential consequences of ignoring the issue. Colonel Harrison and Major Williams were nowhere to be seen during the investigation. Rebecca learned later that they'd been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the inquiry. The base's new acting commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, was a pilot herself and understood the critical importance of proper maintenance. "Ms. Martinez," Kim had said during their first meeting, "I've reviewed your maintenance records. They're exceptional. I want to understand what went wrong here and how we can prevent it from happening again." Rebecca spent the next week working with the investigation team, reviewing procedures, examining aircraft, and providing technical expertise. The investigators were thorough, professional, and genuinely interested, in understanding the maintenance challenges faced by the base. The final report was damning. It documented systematic harassment of civilian contractors, improper maintenance procedures, and a pattern of prioritizing cost savings over safety. The report specifically noted that Rebecca's identification of the electrical problem had prevented a potential aircraft loss and possible pilot fatality. The consequences were immediate and severe. Colonel Harrison was relieved of command and faced a formal inquiry into his conduct. Major Williams was reassigned to a non-operational position. The base's maintenance procedures were overhauled, with new oversight requirements and contractor protections. But the most satisfying moment came when Rebecca was asked to address the base's senior staff about maintenance best practices. She stood before a room full of officers, including some who had questioned her competence just weeks earlier, and delivered a presentation on aviation safety that received a standing ovation. Aviation doesn't care about rank or politics, she told them. It only cares about whether you did the job right. Every shortcut, every compromise, every decision to ignore a problem because it's inconvenient, the aircraft keeps score. And when it comes time to pay that bill, it's usually the pilot who pays it. After her presentation, Lieutenant Colonel Kim approached her privately. "Ms. Martinez, I want to offer you something. We're restructuring our maintenance operations, and we need a civilian technical advisor, someone who can bridge the gap between our military procedures and civilian expertise. The position comes with full base access, security clearance, and the authority to halt any operation you deem unsafe." Rebecca considered the offer carefully. It would mean more money, more responsibility, and the chance to prevent similar situations in the future. But it would also mean working within the system that had just tried to destroy her. "I'll take the position," she said finally, "but I have conditions. My team gets full access to all aircraft and maintenance records. Any safety concerns we raise get immediate attention, and we maintain our civilian contractor status. We work with the military, not for it." Kim nodded. "Done. When can you start?" Rebecca smiled. "I never stopped working. I just got better at it." The transformation at Edwards Air Force Base was remarkable. Within 6 months, maintenance-related incidents dropped to zero. Aircraft availability increased by 15%. The base became a model for civilian-military cooperation, with other installations sending personnel to study their procedures. Rebecca's company grew as well. The positive publicity from the investigation brought new contracts, and her reputation as someone who couldn't be intimidated spread throughout the aviation community. She hired additional technicians, expanded her facilities, and established a training program for young mechanics. But perhaps the most important change was in Rebecca herself. She'd learned that expertise and integrity were more powerful than rank or politics. She discovered that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, was the best way to honor her father's memory. The F-16 that had started it all became something of a symbol. Rebecca had it repaired properly, and it flew without incident for the rest of its service life. The tail number became well known among the pilots, who called it Martinez's bird in honor of the woman who'd saved it from disaster. Years later, when Rebecca was inducted into the Aviation Maintenance Hall of Fame, she was asked about the secret to her success. She thought for a moment before answering. "My father taught me that aircraft don't lie," she said. "They tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen. People lie all the time. They tell you something can't be done, or shouldn't be done, or isn't worth doing. But aircraft are honest. They reward good work and punish bad work, regardless of who does it." She paused, looking out at the audience of mechanics, engineers, and pilots. "The most important thing I learned is that safety isn't negotiable. It doesn't matter if someone outranks you or has more money or more political connections. If something isn't safe, it's your responsibility to speak up. And if they won't listen, you make them listen." The applause was thunderous, but Rebecca was thinking about her father. Miguel Martinez had built his reputation one aircraft at a time, one repair at a time, one satisfied customer at a time. She was carrying on that tradition, but she'd added something new: the courage to fight for what's right, even when the odds seemed impossible. As she left the ceremony, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Colonel Kim, now a full colonel running her own base. "Saw the news about your award. Well deserved. Quick question, we're having some issues with our new contractor. Any chance you could come take a look?" Rebecca smiled and typed back, "On my way. Some things never change." But everything had changed, really. Rebecca Martinez was no longer just a mechanic trying to keep her father's business alive. She was a force in the aviation industry, a woman who'd proven that expertise and integrity could overcome any obstacle. The little girl who'd learned to read engine diagnostics in her father's hangar had become a champion for safety, fairness, and the principle that good work speaks louder than politics. The story of Martinez Aviation Services became legend in the aviation community. It was told in maintenance schools, discussed in professional conferences, and cited in congressional hearings about contractor relations. But for Rebecca, it was simply the story of doing what was right, even when it was hard. She kept the original F-16 maintenance manual on her desk, the one she'd used to prove her point during that first confrontation with Major Williams. Sometimes, when facing a difficult decision, she'd flip through its pages and remember her father's words. "The aircraft doesn't care about your problems. It only cares about whether you did the job right. Rebecca Martinez had done the job right, and in doing so, she'd changed not just her own life, but the entire culture of military aviation maintenance. She'd proven that one person, armed with expertise and courage, could take on the entire system and win. The code burned into that F-16's tail wasn't just a serial number. It was a reminder that excellence endures, that integrity matters, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room has the biggest impact. Rebecca Martinez had read that code correctly, and in doing so, she'd written her own story of triumph over adversity. In the end, the fighter wing hadn't blocked her path at all. They'd simply forced her to find a better way forward, one that led to success beyond anything she'd originally imagined. And every time she walked through those hangar doors, past aircraft that flew safely because of her expertise, Rebecca Martinez knew that her father would be proud. The young woman who'd been locked out of the base that Tuesday morning had become the woman who now held the keys to aviation safety across the entire military. She'd turned the worst day of her career into the foundation of her greatest success, proving that sometimes the best revenge is simply being undeniably good at what you do. As Rebecca often told her apprentices, "They tried to ground me, but they forgot one thing: I'm the one who knows how to fly."